Hello, I'm Meta Spencer, and tell me how many Mongolian diplomats you know. Well, I didn't either until now, but now I'm going to get acquainted with a very distinguished Mongolian diplomat, Ambassador Enkhai Saigon. And Ambassador Enkhai Saigon is a diplomat who's represented Mongolia in many different places around the world since the 1970s, in Austria, in the Soviet Union, in Russia, and other places. He's also represented Mongolia at the IAEA and the United Nations. And he's worked in Mongolia at the National Security Council and has been an advisor to various presidents of Mongolia. He's a very experienced man. I'm excited because he's been very involved in establishing Mongolia as a nuclear weapon-free zone, which is a remarkable achievement and a wonderful one. I wish Canada would do the same. Anyway, he's written a number of articles and on various topics, and is the director of something called the Blue Banner organization. Is that right?
Yes.
Good. So, good morning, Ambassador Enkhai Saigon.
Good morning and good evening. In Mongolian time, it's about 12:30.
About 12:30. You're in Ulaanbaatar now?
Yes.
Well, I wondered whether you were there or out representing your country in some other place, but you're at home. Very good.
We're all now under lockdown.
Yeah,
like in many other places. Yeah.
Well, we're under lockdown too, but it doesn't matter to me because I've sort of locked myself down voluntarily the whole time. I haven't been out of my apartment in over 13 months. So
Really?
yeah, and I'm enjoying it. I'm having the time of my life because I have these wonderful conversations every weekday with somebody interesting. So, well, look, I think probably the thing I want to hear most about, at least right off the bat, is that, Mongolia, I guess, became by itself a single country, a nuclear weapon-free zone, right? And Mongolia is sandwiched between two powers that are very nuclear, Russia and China. And I wonder how they took to that, and how did you accomplish this remarkable thing?
Well, a bit of history first. During the Cold War, Mongolia was under double Cold Wars, East-West and Sino-Soviet. Both of them, were considered as Cold Wars. And at that time, we were on side of the second superpower, the Soviet Union. We thought that, what was good for the Soviet Union, because they were our protectors, that would be good for us, especially because there were some policies in China that they were trying to consider Mongolia as a lost territory, and they want to make up, for the 19th century and so on and so forth. So for that reason, we were close with the Soviet Union. Now, as you have said, situated between two nuclear weapon states is not a very safe thing. But at that time, during the Cold War, we had nowhere to turn to. In fact, we established diplomatic relations with the United States in 1987. Just 1 or 2 years prior to the end of the Cold War. So we had no other big country that was supporting, or, we thought that they would be protecting our interests. That was then. Then the Cold War ended, and the second Cold War, Sino-Soviet conflict also ended, and both sides agreed that they will not use territories of third neighboring states against each other. That was a very good thing. And the end of the East-West Cold War meant that the Soviet troops that were based in Mongolia, was stationed in Mongolia, withdrew. and the Soviet Union was very much interested in its Western front to make sure that the Eastern European countries would continue, if not allies relations, but good relations with Russia and so on and so forth. So, and that at that time, we thought that we should try to make use of that occasion to ensure our security.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by security? See, when there was a Sino-Soviet, conflict of interest, and then there was in 1969, I think, border tensions and border fighting, in which about 1,000 soldiers on both sides, have died.
Wait a minute.
That,
Which I don't know about that one. 1969, there was a
Yeah.
fight between who?
the Soviet Union and China. There was a border incidents and then fighting.
I don't think I knew that. I don't remember a thing
Oh,
about that.
that was a real.
You need to educate me. I may have known once, but I don't remember it.
Yes, it
Ah,
was in
now
1969
what
from
brought 69? What brought that up?
that was in the eastern part on Ussuri River. They were fighting for an island. Later, it became part of China. But at that time, both sides were saying that that island belonged to me or to me.
An island
So,
in the Pacific, off the coast of China.
well, it's not far from Mongolia, to the east of Mongolia. It's called Ussuri River.
Okay, I'll tell you what. I'm going to find a map and put it in, and when I edit this thing. But
And we were on side of the Soviets. In 1967, we concluded a treaty with the Soviet Union, whereby they said that they will protect Mongolia. We were under Soviet, let's say, protection, and in return, they asked to have their bases placed in Mongolia, to which we agreed. So from 1967, there were many Soviet bases in Mongolia. And in 1969, after the border clashes, the Soviet Union had a plan to make preemptive strike against Chinese nuclear facilities.
did they tell you about it?
No, we knew that, but they didn't tell us as such. They told the Warsaw Pact countries,
Uh-huh.
and then they said, "Don't be surprised if we'll make some preemptive strikes against China." So, and then of course, since at that time there were two superpowers, the Soviets turned to the United States and tried to find out what would be the U.S. reaction to that.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, I think Nixon and Kissinger were in power, and they were thinking of balancing the two red giants.
Mm-hmm.
So they said that, they would not agree to such a preemptive strike, and that would mean a starting of a World War III.
Right.
And I
By
think
the
there
way,
were.
do you think that Russia would have done it if the U.S. had said okay, or were they just sniffing around to see what was possible?
Well, I don't know. But at that time, as I was a student, I was reading that the Chinese were building tunnels. They were distributing their, let's say, military forces. They had number one military alert and so on and so forth. But I don't know really what would have happened. But if something would have happened, and if
really
U.S. would have,
they really were really upset with each other.
yes.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, why? What had happened that made so much tension during that period?
Well, in 1963, the United States approached the Soviet Union with an idea that perhaps, jointly they could make a preemptive strike against Chinese nuclear programs. 1963. In 1964, in October, China already made a successful test of nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
And the US was not insisting on that. But by the end of 1960s, the Soviets thought that, that Chinese nuclear ambitions should be brought down. They were thinking that, if China becomes very strong and there's United States and the Soviet Union would have to fight on both fronts, and it was not good, and so forth. So in any case, they have approached the US, and the US said no. That would be like, starting a World War III.
Sure.
And you can read it.
You're reminding me of things that either I forgot or never knew. I mean, this is sort of like not something I recollect. And you say that at one point the U.S. approached Russia with the idea of jointly
the Soviet Union.
The Soviet Union, yeah.
In 1963, just a year prior to China's nuclear test.
Now, was this known? Because I'm ashamed of myself that if that's well known, why don't I know it? Because I know I've heard that. Was this public knowledge, or did they say so overtly, or how do you know this was true?
Well, we learned that later on. I mean, near the end of the Cold War and after Cold War, when archive materials are being, so that was the time. Why I'm telling you is why Mongolia tried to become a nuclear weapon-free zone country. Sensing that, that was a very, very big lesson that we have learned. One of the first things that Mongolia, now we call it New Mongolia, not pro-Soviet, but more or less independent Mongolia. And we have decided to turn Mongolia into a nuclear weapon-free zone. Why? First, because of that lesson. And the second is that by September, October of 1992, the Soviet Union was withdrawing its bases from Mongolia. Mm-hmm. So at that time, our president went to the General Assembly and made an announcement that Mongolia will be becoming a nuclear weapon-free zone, and Mongolia wants to have international guarantees from nuclear weapon states. Mm-hmm. So that's how it began, and it was a very good opportunity because at that time the Soviets, the Russians, and the Chinese have agreed not to use territories of third neighboring countries against each other. So that opened us, I think, a way to be more bold and come up with this idea. Mm-hmm. So the history.
You were involved in that planning, right? Because I know that according to the things I've read, you were very instrumental in creating this nuclear weapon-free zone. Right?
Well, I was at that time national security advisor. So for us, one of the most important things, besides overcoming the economic devastations, was to make sure that the situation of 1969 will not be repeated.
Okay, well, were both China and the Soviet Union open to this? I would imagine they would not particularly like it. But how did they react to this? And did you expect them to go along with it? Or, that's another thing we need to talk about. What really is a nuclear weapon-free zone in terms of what are the relations with the other countries that have to be established in order to make it a real one?
Well, first, we had a discussion among ourselves, and we said that since Russia and China have agreed not to use the territories of neighboring third countries against each other, that already meant that they would have no big problems. But if we would have approached, perhaps the reaction would have been, well, it's not time. You have to wait for disarmament, such things, and you should not be in a hurry. So we decided to make the decision ourselves, go to the General Assembly, and our president, had announced it. Otherwise, we wouldn't have known what would be the reaction. They would say, well, wait a year or 2 years and so on and so forth. And that would have lost the momentum. And there was, I think, a very good political momentum, because at that time, there were 2 already nuclear weapon-free zones being discussed. In 1992, I think Southeast Asia was negotiating the terms of its nuclear weapon-free zone. African continent was also discussing this issue. Already it was high on their political agenda. And even in Northeast Asia, the two Koreans in 1992 have agreed, at least at that time, to a declaration to turning the Korean Peninsula into a non-nuclear, peninsula. So at that time, I think.
Would they have wanted to join in a regional NWFZ or not?
No, at that time, I think they were talking only about their Korean Peninsula. So at that time, I think the North Koreans already started their programs. And it was, I think, politically a very good moment for us to come up with this idea. Now, you might ask, some people ask, why all of a sudden you want to become a nuclear weapon-free zone? There are many countries in the world that don't have nuclear weapons. They have no intention of having nuclear weapons, and they don't see that other big countries would bring in their nuclear weapons. For us, it is the question of security assurances, because you can never know. The situation can always change, and we want to make sure that we have a preventive action, making sure that Mongolian territory will not be used by any other external force or country to harm the interest of another, let's say, great power and so on. And in order to do that, we want to get security assurances from the P5, including from our 2 neighbors.
Okay, well, now, could you say, well, all these other countries in the world don't bother to get it, to declare themselves nuclear weapon-free zones? What if, how difficult would it be? Suppose all the other countries in the world, except the P5, let's say, said, okay, we'll become a nuclear weapon-free zone. What would happen? What has to happen to make it a real thing? I mean, there is, as far as I know, there is no historical legal status called nuclear weapon-free zones in international law. It must be something that is declared and yet has to be recognized by other countries in order to be considered a real nuclear weapon-free zone. So how do you negotiate such a thing? And suppose another country says, nothing doing, we won't recognize you as such. Would that be likely to happen for some countries?
Well, timing was very important at that time. Timing was that, Russia and China were now improving their relations, and they thought that they will not use the territories of the neighboring countries. That was very good. The second was the timing of, there was a big, I think, talk about establishing nuclear weapon-free zones in different parts of the world. That was also good for us. And then the third one is that we also thought that taking the issue to the United Nations for all the countries to hear would be very important for us politically. And that happened, because the overwhelming majority of member states of the United Nations supported it. And they
well, now, could every country in the world do that right now, if they wanted to? I mean, I haven't thought about this before. what would be involved in such a move? We think all the time nowadays about the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, which is, of course, a more ambitious project. But I haven't thought about what it takes to become a nuclear weapon-free zone. You just declare you may not bomb us. I mean, what do you say? You're not allowed to kill us, what does it involve?
Well, first is that so far nuclear weapon-free zones is recognized as an agreement among a couple of countries of a particular region. Agreement.
Okay.
Among them, that none of them would, develop nuclear weapons.
Okay.
First. The second is the agreement that they will have also a verification mechanism. When you come to an agreement, you make sure that the other party to the zone also, would not secretly, develop interest and develop nuclear weapons and so on.
Some
And
sort of, excuse me, like a verification system of some
yes, yes.
Okay.
Among them, among the non-nuclear weapon countries of that region.
Okay.
And the third condition is that this is recognized by 5 nuclear weapon states. Not only recognized, but also they provide, let's say, positive and negative security assurances. Negative meaning that they will not use or threaten to use nuclear weapons against that zone or against the country in that zone. And the positive assurance is that if there will be some trouble, they will provide some assistance. So these are the 3 conditions for nuclear weapon-free zones. Now, until today, there have never been any single state nuclear weapon-free zone. And Mongolia is the first country, and so far it's the only country that is working to have itself recognized as a single state nuclear weapon-free zone. If you look at the NPT treaty, it's Article 7 talks about group zones, a group of countries establishing nuclear weapon-free zones. And based on that, there's so far no legal norm about single state nuclear weapon-free zones. So we had to approach the 5 nuclear weapon states to discuss this issue. First, their reaction was that they support Mongolia's initiative, as a goodwill gesture, but they cannot go beyond that. They cannot support Mongolia's policy because they thought that might set a precedent for other countries. There'll be other smaller countries will come up and say, well, we are becoming nuclear weapon-free zone, and we want to have security assurances from the 5 nuclear weapon states. So first thing. The second thing, they said that they don't want to encourage establishing single state zones because they believe that regional zones should be the answer. So they don't want to set a precedent. So we had to discuss, talk, and negotiate with them. First, a General Assembly resolution that would recognize Mongolia's initiative. And the second is how to and what form of security assurance they might provide us with. So we had about over 80 meetings with the nuclear weapon states, bilateral, trilateral, even meeting with the P5 as well. But we always had it not at the highest level, but at the mid-level to talk business. And for us, it was important also to point out what is good for them, not only for Mongolia, but what is good for them. If you do this and that, it will be construed like this, positive, and so on and so forth. It was, I think, a very important point that we made.
Well, do they buy it? I mean, do they see any advantages for themselves? And I suppose different countries might have different attitudes. I don't know whether Russia and China, the US and so on would all take the same point of view, but presumably you're negotiating with them, each country separately, not as a group of the people.
Well, first we wanted their positive response to our initiative.
Mm-hmm.
But that was not so easy because they had this how you call it, a football principle. They said we would go to one, they would say, well, we have no problems. Look at the map and so on. Go and talk to, let's say, to your neighbors. Let's say the U.S. would say,
Okay.
and the Russia and China would say that we have no problems. We're neighboring countries. We will not harm you. We don't have such an intention. But we have to do it, as a group. So the first among equals at that time, in the early 1990s, was the United States. So they said you should go and speak to the United States. So we spent about a year to going and explaining our position to each one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, the French said no, they cannot accept Mongolia as a single state country. Why? Because I don't know. I mean, it was the reason that they said that they cannot accept was that they have many countries with which they have very close relations. It's called the Francophone countries, more than 30 countries. And those countries would be surprised. How come you are providing or you're ready to provide security assurances to a country, a small country in Central Asia, while they have many other countries in Africa, Francophone countries, they don't have such thing. So it was a lame excuse, but so we stopped at that time. So then our next position was to go to the United Nations itself, not to go from one nuclear weapon state to another, but go to the United Nations
To the
itself.
Security Council or to the General Assembly?
The General Assembly. The Security Council would have said, well, this is the question for the General Assembly to decide.
Okay.
Yeah, because
Okay.
so we went and we knew that that we will be getting a lot of support because the overwhelming majority of the General Assembly are non-nuclear weapon states.
Right.
They are in solidarity with us. They want to see support this in that sense.
Sure.
So that's how we went. We discussed those issues with the P5. It was the most important thing is to get P5 approval and support. Because who would be providing security assurances if we get assurance? The P5.
Yeah.
Not the non-nuclear weapon states, not the non-aligned, not the ASEAN, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So our main partner was the P5. So we, as I said, we met more than 80 times bilaterally, trilaterally, as a group, and so on and so forth. It was not easy because when it comes to nuclear weapon zone related issues, as I understand, they discuss among themselves first.
The P5.
Yeah, the P5. Okay. So it is very difficult, to go and talk to one because they will say, well, I have no problems. Go to speak to the other and let them convince. You should convince them. We will not be the ones, who would be running, but you should be doing that. So when we went to the General Assembly, the majority was supportive, and there were even some radicals. They said, well, you don't have to have, let's say, P5 approval or support. You have the overwhelming majority of votes in the General Assembly. Just go and vote. We didn't want that. We don't want an empirical victory. We want agreement with the P5 to provide security assurances. And of course, we had to do our homework as well, adopt a national legislation defining the
what do you mean by that?
national law on nuclear weapon-free status of Mongolia, meaning that we will not allow nuclear weapon states to put their weapons in Mongolia.
I'm sorry, but are you saying it'd be something like a referendum or some vote that the people would have to agree to? Or when you say registered, what?
Well, I mean, we first had to go and have a national legislation law saying that Mongolian now is a nuclear weapon-free zone country, and that all the activities should be in accordance with that law, and criminalizing some activities like, transporting nuclear related, let's say, material through Mongolia and so on and so forth. So first we had to have a national legislation. In response to that, the 5 nuclear weapon states have made a joint statement in 2000 saying that they will not use or threaten to use nuclear weapons against Mongolia.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But we told the 5 nuclear weapon states that that's not what we wanted. You're talking in the language of Cold War. We have no problems with you. What we want is to get some assurance that you will not, let's say, pressure us to accept nuclear weapons or parts of such weapons on Mongolian territory.
Mm-hmm.
If you do that, that will be good for us.
Mm-hmm.
It took us about 10 years to come to such an agreement,
Mm-hmm.
because they said that that would set a precedent again, the question precedent.
Mm-hmm.
That after Mongolia, there'll be another small country, another country, maybe an island country, saying, well, we are declared ourselves a nuclear weapon free zone, we have a legislation, now give us these assurances. So we had a lot of talks about the assurances, the form and the content of assurances.
Mm-hmm.
What we wanted is to get something like a Budapest memorandum. I don't know if you know that.
No.
That's an agreement whereby, let's say, Kazakhstan, Belarus, and Ukraine have said that they will become party to the NPT, and they will give their weapons to Russia.
Oh, yes. Okay.
In return, Russia, US, and Britain would provide them with political security assurances. So at that time, we thought that, that would be a good, for Mongolia.
Mm-hmm.
But, and we thought that, that was an internationally recognized way to get some assurance from nuclear weapon countries. Because the difference between Mongolia and Ukraine is that Ukraine had 1,500 nuclear weapons. We do not. And so it was difficult, for us to insist on that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and in the end, we had to have right the wrong campaign. We told the nuclear weapon state that what their joint statement was a wrong statement, Cold War era, and that does not reflect the actual good relations that we have with all the 5 nuclear weapons countries. So how come all of a sudden you're saying that we will not use nuclear weapons or threaten to use nuclear weapons against Mongolia? That's not what we wanted. And we told them, what we wanted, security assurances that they will accept and agree to Mongolia's nuclear weapon-free status, not the zone, because they don't want to use the word zone.
Okay.
So nuclear weapon-free status, and that they will not do anything to violate it. So they promised to Mongolia and to each other. That's good. That's good for us at this stage.
Okay. Now, what would happen? What's the relationship between that kind of effort and the current Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Is there any reason for other countries now to try to create nuclear weapon-free zones or even independent nuclear weapon-free states? Is that sort of like irrelevant now because all that you need to do is sign the TPNW? Or is there any value in doing it?
Well, establishing nuclear weapon-free zones is a very important practical measure. That on that, let's say, territory zone, there'll be no nuclear weapons, no suspicion that one will be using against the other, and so on. And it is considered as a very important measure of non-proliferation. And once we start, let's say, discussing, let's say, nuclear weapon-free zone in Middle East or Northeast Asia, it's going to be also a disarmament measure, because there are nuclear weapons, let's say, in the Middle East and on the Korean Peninsula. So we believe that, most of the easy nuclear weapon-free zones have already been established.
I see.
There are 5 nuclear weapon-free zones.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, the second generation of nuclear weapon-free zones would be very difficult because they are, let's say, in places where there are problems, disputes.
Mm-hmm. Well, the Middle East being the most obvious one.
Middle East
now,
and Northeast Asia.
Tell me about that, because I believed that the U.S. went along with the proposal to have a conference on a Middle East nuclear weapon-free zone, and it's just Israel that refrained and refused. But if the U.S. went along with it, I don't suppose any other nuclear power would have any objection. Maybe, I don't know. I doubt it. Well, I don't have any reason for having an opinion. But did the U.S., was it true that it's only Israel's refusal that has made that not happen? Or are the nuclear weapons states, any of them, trying to keep it from happening?
Well, I mean, Israel, yes, and then the U.S.
U.S. doesn't want it to happen either. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised, but I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I see.
Okay. And then the second region is Northeast Asia, the Korean Peninsula. And in Northeast Asia, there are many nuclear capable countries, Japan and South Korea. I don't know how long they will, let's say, wait until they will say, okay, that's enough. We've been waiting for the negotiations. Nothing is happening, and so on. So I think in both countries, there are, let's say, military forces that believe that, they should not wait and they should start thinking about getting nuclear weapons. That is one of the reasons why I think the U.S. Is trying to discuss with the North Koreans the conditions of denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula.
Okay, that brings up a whole different conversation. I understand that Biden, before he became president, indicated that he was favorable toward a no first use policy by the U.S. And I understand that Japan, at least the government of Abe, I don't know what else, has been trying hard to keep the U.S. from actually taking that position because they want this extended deterrence policy. Where does that stand, and what can be done? What should be done to encourage the U.S. to do this? I don't think they call it no first use anymore. It's something like sole purpose. The language is that the sole purpose of nuclear weapons is deterrence.
Well, there are there's some nuance also.
Okay.
Sole purpose is when you say that you will use your nuclear weapons if the other side would use nuclear weapons. No first use is a little bit different. I think this issue is hopefully will be taken up by the United States because much depends on the U.S. policy in this area. And just as you have said, I also read in the papers, of course. I'm retired, so I don't get much, let's say, confidential material. So I also read that the Japanese were not very supportive. That there is still such a thinking in the U.S., but they have not yet made up their mind. We believe, Blue Banner, I represent not the country anymore, but the Blue Banner NGO. Blue Banner NGO believes that, one of the things that to move the issue, let's say, of denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula and establishing nuclear weapon-free zone in Northeast Asia would be the issue of no first use. That would also, if the US and Russia and China would say they will not use nuclear weapons first, that will be a very good, I think, sign.
Well, my guess is that doesn't sound very likely.
Likely or unlikely?
That would be a very hard sell, wouldn't it?
In the US, yes.
Yeah, in North Korea.
Well, North Korea is not part of that at this stage. Not part of a discussion of this issue. Because they're saying that they need nuclear weapons and they will not, move their position unless the US revises its position with respect to North Korea and unless the, let's say, economic sanctions are lifted and so on and so forth.
Okay, I thought that's what we were talking about initially, that would be basically a nuclear weapon-free zone in that region, which would have to be North Korea.
Yes, of course. Yeah. You see, there are two issues. Denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula is good, but it's not enough because there will be, again, Japan and South Korea and some other countries and so on. So the best thing is to establish a Northeast Asian nuclear weapon-free zone.
Right.
It's called a 3+3 formula. 3 countries of Northeast Asia, let's say 2 Koreas and Japan, will not have nuclear weapons. And the 3 nuclear weapon states, US, Russia, and China, would provide them with security assurances. That's the formula that is being considered. Unfortunately, the question of Northeast Asian nuclear weapon-free zone is not being discussed officially, only unofficially. And Mongolia was the first country in 2013 to say that it was prepared to work to look into the possibility of establishing nuclear weapon-free zone. And we have undertaken a number of informal meetings and consultations. So that's where the 3+3 has come in.
Okay. Well, now here you're telling me something that I didn't know. Telling me a lot of things I hadn't known. I'm sorry to say I'm not always well informed because I don't know anything about this 3+3 thing. Is this just a wishful thinking, or is there some realistic basis for trying to make such a thing happen? It sounds like an extremely ambitious goal, given the assumptions I have about North Korea and the US now. That would be, the relation between them would be enough to, prevent that from even being serious, isn't it?
Well, I see, as I see it, North Korea will not give up its nuclear weapons at this stage. Right. Maybe it's later on, but that would mean that would need for Russia and China to come in also to provide additional assurance to North Korea,
Yeah.
assurance that if there's going to be an agreement, they will make sure that U.S. will live up to its promise, unlike with regard to JCPOA. And it's very important. And the second thing is what is important is to look at the economic cooperation. First is to have, let's say, no that the Security Council would have to withdraw its sanctions. And what Blue Banner says is that that would not be enough, that perhaps a mini Marshall Plan should be devised.
Say it
When
again. The Russia plan, what? That would not be enough. And so what else would have to happen?
Also providing North Korea with mini Marshall Plan. That's how we see it. Mini Marshall Plan. But it does not have to be only US providing assistance. But there are many countries, EU, you have South Korea is willing, Japan would be willing, and so on and so forth. That I think would be a very, very useful
Okay, now you have mentioned this Blue Banner, and I mentioned it because I saw your name attached to it, but I don't know anything about it. You sound as if this proposal is that Blue Banner has taken the initiative, which means you, right?
Well, Blue Banner. Okay, let's say it's Blue Banner.
Call it Blue Banner. So tell me about Blue Banner, and I presume then I would love to see that written up. Has it been discussed in any publication or anything so far? Because you're describing something like a quiet discussion going on that I hadn't heard anything about. I would love to get a discussion about that proposal for Peace Magazine in its next issue.
Well, I can provide you, our proposal, Blue Banner's proposal, and it is being discussed within the Northeast Asian NGOs.
There is a discussion going on already there about it.
Yes. I can provide you with that article, the analysis, how Blue Banner sees it, and
perfect.
Okay.
Well, that's wonderful. Now, one final thing, we only have a few minutes left. I've seen that your name is connected with some of the effort to work on bringing North and South Korea back together, unifying them. Is that true? That have you been involved in such an initiative?
Well, this is Mongolia's policy in general. And we try to work with the two sides to bring them together. In fact, Mongolia was able to bring, let's say, North Korea and the US, North Korea and Japan together in Mongolia to discuss some of the issues.
Really?
So it's there, yes. And as I said, when we had more than 80, let's say, meetings with the P5, it's always been at a mid-level decision, preparing level, not grabbing headlines, because once something grabs headlines, it goes down. That's how we see it. So some of the things that we're trying to do is to do it at the mid level. For example, the question of single-state nuclear weapon-free zone. What we're trying to say, and we say to people that look at nuclear weapon-free zones, those are group zones. But when you have a single country or let's say an island state or non-self-governing territory, they are left out. They are becoming, let's say, how do you say in English? Gray zones, blind spots.
Yeah.
in developing new, let's say, the world without nuclear weapons. There are about 20 countries and islands, that will be, blind spots. So that's why we're saying that establishing single-state nuclear weapon-free zones is very important.
Mhm.
Look at Nepal. Nepal and Afghanistan were interested in Mongolia, and they still are interested. As you might know, it's since early 1970s, there were, I think, some talks and discussions at the United Nations in establishing, let's say, a nuclear weapon-free zone in South Asia. Now, since 1998, India and Pakistan became de facto nuclear weapon states. So other countries are thinking about, how to ensure their security, and they see that, like in Mongolia's example, single-state nuclear weapon-free zone.
So
So
if you
there's,
got that accepted widely, generally, there would be other countries that would follow suit, you think, a lot of them.
well, about 20 countries, I believe.
Uh-huh.
And then hopefully, I think in NATO, there are a number of countries that they do not allow placing nuclear weapons on their territory in peacetime. Iceland, Denmark, Norway, Spain, and so on. So there might be some other countries, they will say, okay, we're part of NATO, let's say, alliance, but we don't want to accept nuclear weapons under any circumstances.
Mhm.
I think that will, if that number increases, I think that will allow to talk about turning NATO into a non-nuclear alliance. I don't know. You can
That-
never know. I mean, we smaller countries try to think big. When I was working at the United Nations, a number of times I met with Kofi Annan, and we discussed what small
Mhm.
countries can do. And he said the smaller countries, they can come up with very good ideas because they know what can be done, what cannot be done, and so on and so forth.
Mhm. Mhm.
So we're expecting from smaller countries big ideas.
Wow. Well, you're producing them too, because this conversation, which I think we have to pretty well terminate soon, is a treasure house of good ideas. You've had really mentioned several things that I hadn't heard before. I don't think many of us here are thinking about, and that we should try to pursue. I wish we could say, can we help you? Can we,
Well,
um,
if you spread the word, that will be good,
that's what I'll try to do. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
but
wonderful having this conversation. And I know a few years ago there was a peace conference in Mongolia, and I almost went, but I didn't go. But seemed like a huge trip. But I got to reading about all the wonderful things going on in Mongolia, and I came away feeling extremely impressed. This is a country that has really done miraculous things, especially
well,
where you're located. It's so bold and courageous, and I think, so far as I know, you've done marvels. So blessings.
well, thank you very much. I hope you'll have a chance to come to Mongolia. I mean, where
Well, I
we
probably won't make
organize
it
some
in this lifetime, but I certainly send my good wishes to Mongolia. Thank you very much.
no. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for developing interest in Mongolia. I'll send you the article about the ideas of
Yes.
Bulibana, and let us see.
Mhm. All right. Thanks so much. This has been wonderful. Blessings.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very
Bye.
much. Okay. Thank you very much.